My name is Todd Miranda, and in this video I'm going to demonstrate how to use a value converter to format data in a binding statement in WPF. So let's begin with Microsoft Visual Studio 2008. We'll choose File, New Project, and we'll name our project accordingly. Alright, so we get our default grid, and that'll work for us. So let's just begin our project by creating the control that we're going to bind to. So we've got to have something to bind our data to. So let's start with an items control. I'm just going to create this items control. We're going to give it a name, and we'll just call this list items. Alright, and let's create a items control dot item panel, and this is going to be an items panel template. This is just going to be, we're going to use a stack panel with an orientation set to vertical, which is actually the default, and we'll vertical align this to top. Alright, so that is our panel, which means that's the panel that the items are going to be laid out in. So now let's create an items control dot item template, and this is going to be a data template. And in our data template we'll choose a stack panel again, orientation equals vertical again, which again is the default. Maybe let's do a background on that so that it's not just so ordinary. Alright, and in our stack panel we're going to have a couple of text blocks. Oops, not text alignment, text block. And the text will be bound to fields that fields in the object we're going to bind to this. So let's do a binding expression. Binding, let's just do path equals name. Alright, simple enough. And then we'll do another text block, and this will be bound to a property called since. So we'll do a member list with the name of the member and how long they've been a member, so the member since date. And let's set a margin on this to 15, and that'll just give us some spacing between items. We could also have done that margin on the stack panel, which probably is the more appropriate. Let's just go ahead and do that. That's probably a little bit more appropriate to do that margin there on the stack panel. Okay, so there's our items control that we'll be able to bind to. So now let's go and let's build an object that we can bind to, and then just in the Windows loaded event we'll go ahead and wire everything up. So let's just do loaded, and we get our new event handler. We'll double click on that. It'll just do the window loaded there, and it'll create that window loaded event handler here in the back. Okay, so before we do our window loaded event, let's create our object. So let's just come here in the same namespace. Let's just do a public. We'll do class, and we'll just call this members. Alright, and we'll have a couple of private variables in here. And we'll do a private string underscore name, and then we'll do a private date time underscore since. And now let's do a couple of accessors. So we've got a public string name, and in here we've got get return underscore name and set. That doesn't look right, does it? There we go. Set, we're going to do underscore name equals value. Okay. So now let's do a public date time since. We'll do a get return underscore since and set underscore since equals value. Alright, So there's a simple class, just has two properties, one name and one since, that being a string and a date time. So let's go up here to our window loaded event, and let's just create a list, a generic list of type members, and we'll just call this list equals new. That looks good to me. So we'll do list.add. We're just going to add a couple of items in here. So we'll do new members, name equals John Smith, since equals, and we'll come over here and we'll just do a new date time. Let's say he joined in 2000, maybe on 2/17. Alright. Great. So let's add a few more people in there. And maybe this is Mary Smith, Jimmy Smith, and Sally Smith. And let's see, Mary joined in 2001, 6/2, 2005, 8/10, and maybe December 12th of 2007. Okay. So there's a few members in our generic list. So now let's say list items dot item source equals list to bind those values to our list items. Okay, let's build this and see if we've missed anything. Build succeeded. Let's run it. Alright, so here is our list of members with their date. But notice how the date is formatted. And this is because by default, in the binding on a date time or other type of object, a toString is performed on that. And when you do a toString, it just formats it in this long manner here. So let's say that we want to format that date. Well, what we'd really like to do is we'd like to go over here, and in this binding, we'd like to specify a format. So maybe something like this. Well, we don't have that capability right now in WPF. That capability might be coming up soon, but we don't have it right now. So right now what we want to do is we want to build a value converter and use the value converter to format our date to the appropriate, the appropriate way that we want it formatted. So how do we do that? Well, let's begin by creating a new class, and we're going to create a value converter that we'll be able to use for that, and then we'll come back to our XAML and see how we implement that and how we use it. So let's do project. We'll do add class, and we're just going to call this date converter. Let's add a using system.windows.data so that we can get access to our value converter, which is what we're going to inherit from. And then let's right click here and do implement interface so we can be lazy and not have to type all that. So notice that we've got two interface members. We've got convert and convert back. So even though we're using this value converter for formatting our data, remember that it is just that. It is a value converter. So it's a converter to be used in the binding that allows us to do conversion from something coming into the converter to something going out of the converter. What goes out of the converter is what's going to be shown in the interface. If you're doing data binding, and that data binding is two-way data binding, you need to be able to do the convert back. So you need to take the displayed value, or the value that was to some degree entered by the user, convert that back to the appropriate format that then goes back to the object. So in this case, we're not going to implement the convert back. So we're simply going to leave this throw new not implemented exception, because all we're really interested in is the display capability. So we just want to convert so that we can display the date in the appropriate format. Okay, so now convert takes a couple of parameters. The object value is the actual value that we're going to try to convert. The target type is the type that we want to convert to. we can pass a parameter into this guy, and then we also have culture information. So for this simple demonstration right now, let's just start by saying return, because we know we're going to get passed in a date time. So we're cheating a little bit because we know the type that we're going to be able to use, and we also know the actual value type, the object type that's coming in. So we're going to do string.format, and we're just going to specify a format string of something like this. Okay. And I want to use this string format like this for a particular reason. We'll see why in just a moment. And then we are going to use value. So that's pretty much it for this pretty simple example of how we're going to use the converter. We're simply going to do a format on the date time coming in. We're going to format it this way and return it back to the UI. Alright, so let's build. And build succeeded. Great. Now, let's go back to our XAML and see how we're going to be able to utilize this. Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to create a reference to this namespace in our XAML. So we're going to do XML namespace, and we'll just do local, which is kind of a typical naming convention. And we're going to let Visual Studio show us the ones that we can choose from, and we're just going to choose this namespace in its own assembly. Alright, here we are. Now we're going to go into our window.resources, and we're going to put it in the resources here in case we wanted to use this converter in multiple places. And let's do a local, colon, date converter is what we want, and we'll give it a key, and we'll just call this my converter. Alright, now let's go down to our binding statements, and what we want to convert is this binding path since. That's our date time field. So let's come in here and let's do converter equals, and this is a static resource, and it's called my converter. Okay, so there we specify the converter that we want to use for this binding. So let's run this again. Let's build, make sure we didn't create any errors. Okay, and run it again. And there's our date nicely formatted. So if we want to change the format of the date, we would go to our date converter and make this a different format like that. We'll save that and run it again. And now you see that we've changed the format of our date. Well, that seems kind of cumbersome. Every time we want to change the format, we want to come in here to our date converter and we have to recompile that. Yeah, that seems a little clumsy. So why don't we do this? Why don't we change this back, and this time we're going to utilize the parameter that's being passed in. So let's come in here and let's say if parameter is not equal to null, then we can come in here and we'll do string.format, and instead of specifying the format, we'll say parameter.toString, and then we'll specify the value. Alright, and we're going to do a return on that. Well, if our parameter is null, we'll pass on through to our default string.format. So this will be our default format here. Alright, again, let's build. And I want to run it to make sure that we're passing through to our default date format. Yep, looks like we are. So let's go back to our XAML. And now let's specify a converter parameter. So we're going to come in here and we're going to do converter parameter equals. And here's where we're going to pass in our format string. So we're going to do a single tick. We're going to escape our bracket, and we'll say 0 colon month. I'm going to say day, year. We're going to escape our bracket again and put our tick mark there. So there is our converter parameter, which is a different format that we're specifying for our date. And let's run this. And there you can see we've passed in the string format that we want to use for the date. The converter took that as a parameter, applied it to our string.format, and was able to appropriately format the date. So you can imagine now that what you could do is build a very generic formatting converter that would take whatever format string you passed in. You could even use the culture information in your string.format statement and pass in the value and be able to format whatever string you'd like. Then again, if you're using this for formatting for data that you want a two-way bind, you need to implement the convert back, and you just simply need to take the data that comes in and you need to parse it to the right type, which is the target type that'll be passed here, and convert it to that type so that it gets passed back to the object, back to the original source object. So you see how easy it is to create a converter, use it in our XAML to do some formatting on our data, and very easily be able to format data however we want and do that in multiple places and make it very flexible by using the parameters to pass any type of format strings in.